Good Shabbos. This week is Parsha Shlach, and the portion focuses on the story of the Meraglim, of the spies. And we all know that the punishment for the sin of the spies was that the Jews wandered in the desert for 40 years, every year for every day that they went on their mission. And simply, it's a case of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. You don't want to go into the land of Israel, you don't get to go into the land of Israel. But the Gemara and Maimonides, picking up on that, focuses on the sin of Lashon Hara, of speaking evil of someone or something. And as Maimonides puts it, that V'lo nechtam gzar din al v'seinu b'midbar, the decree on our forefathers in the desert was only sealed ela al Lashon Hara levad, because of the sin of Lashon Hara, of speaking evil. And an obvious question is, you would think that wouldn't be the paradigm of Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara we think of as saying something bad about somebody else, another person, and harming them. Saying something bad about the land of Israel, even though it might affect our view of our God's promises, you wouldn't think that that would be the prime example of Lashon Hara. So the question is, why is that the example? So let's just look at some of the statements made by Maimonides when he talks about the problem of the sin of Lashon Hara. And he says that the greatest sin is Lashon Hara. He's talking about different sins of speaking, being of saying Motzi Shemra, saying something false about someone else, or saying Lashon Hara, or saying something bad about someone, Afal Pishu Emes, even though it's true, or someone who's a rachel, someone who goes from house to house and just tells stories. All of that, he says, the worst sin is Lashon Hara. And he emphasizes that even though it's true, it's still Lashon Hara. And the punishment for that is you die for it. Now, of course, it's a little bit of an exaggeration here. The Torah doesn't give you the death sentence for it, but he's saying that it's really a very harmful sin. And he says, again, quoting a Gemara, he says that Lashon Hara kills three people: the one who says it, the one who receives it and accepts the Lashon Hara, and the one who it's said about. And he says, "V'hamakablo yosem min ha'omra." The one who accepted it is worse than the one who said it. He doesn't say it's worse than the one who it's said about, but he does say it's worse than the one who said it. And again, you'd have to ask the question. You would think that the greater sin is the one who spreads the Lashon Hara rather than the one who receives it and accepts it. Also, you would also think that Motzi Shemra, saying something false about someone, would be worse. And I think the answer is quite simple, and hopefully answers all of these questions. Let's go back to the last question. If you say something false about someone, yes, that could be terribly harmful and also undeserving. But the answer or the solution to that is that people will find out the truth. If you say something that's false and you lie about your fellow, your neighbor, your fellow human being, a friend, a family member, hopefully and usually it will be found out to be false, and the harm won't happen. But the harm done for something true, you can't take it back. Once people know, they already have a certain view and perspective on the person that you said the Lashon Hara about, and because there's no taking it back, the harm might be much more severe. And the simple explanation of all this is that Lashon Hara isn't so much the one who you're saying it about or the one who says it, but it is the makabel. It's the one who accepts it. Why? Because if you receive Lashon Hara, what you're really doing is undermining the value and the purpose of that other person. So the fact that someone said it, well, maybe it wasn't received. The harm won't be as bad. The harm is more for the person who received it, and of course it's going to harm the person who it's said about. But if you think about it, every human being, every person, every family member, every community member has a purpose in their community, in their family. And when you undermine their role, then you're basically harming not just them or not just you, but you're harming society as a whole. You're harming your community. You're harming the family. you're harming a bigger entity than just one or even two people. You're destroying the purpose that God has given to this person to act out in this world. Now you could say, well, as many people would say, but it's true. So the truth is, there is an exception to the rule of Lashon Hara. If the Lashon Hara is spread in order to protect people, if there's someone who's a thief, a fraudster, or a murderer, then of course you should tell people about that. And the only time that Lashon Hara is really forbidden is when, the way I understand it, is when the sin is not sufficient to undermine their role. Just think about it. If you tell your brother or sister that your father or mother lied, so they might have lied, but they still are overall an authority figure in the family, and they're doing what's correct in general for the purpose of the children. But they might have lied once. But what happens is, if you lie, if you tell the truth about your father's lie, your mother's lie, now the next time your father or mother talks to one of the other children and says, please do this for me, they'll say, why should I do it for you? They lost complete respect for them. And by losing that respect, they've completely undermined the role of the parent. And that's exactly what happened with the sin of the Meraglim, the spies. And maybe that's why it's a paradigm. Because it wants to show that it's more than just harming someone. Harming someone is a terrible thing. But what's really worse than harming someone is destroying their purpose and destroying God's purpose. So when you speak falsely or truthfully, even about the land of Israel, that it's very difficult to conquer, you're not harming the land. The land could care less, but you're harming God's plan for the land, or harming God's plan for the Jewish people. And by doing that, you're totally undermining what's really supposed to be happen, what's supposed to be the goal of that person or entity. And therefore, that's why being makabel at the end of the day, accepting it, is the worst thing. We have to be very careful, and this is the lesson we all have to take from this. We have to be very careful when we spread rumors, when we talk about other people. Sometimes there's a purpose, there's sometimes a value. If you're hiding the fact that someone is molesting people, children, you're not doing any good for anybody. It's important to sometimes spread that. I say sometimes, every case is of course different. But generally, yes, make sure you're protecting other people. But if you tell other people something just that doesn't rise or pass the threshold of real terrible harm, that they still really deserve a place in your community, then you're doing a harm which is much greater. And therefore the punishment is greater. And you're not only undermining the community and the goal, you're undermining yourself. You're undermining your ability to work within that society, within that community. And hopefully that's the message of Lashon Hara. And the other example of Lashon Hara is one we had last week when Miriam spoke about Moshe, that she complained that he took a Isha Kushas, an Ethiopian woman, as a wife. And wherever the explanation is in that story, what she was doing was she was undermining the authority of Moshe. She said, did God just speak to Moshe? He spoke to all of us. And God is coming back and saying, no, Moshe is special. Moshe is unique. Moshe is a legislator. He's different than any other prophet. And by saying and bringing him down to the level of everyone else, you're completely undermining his authority as Moshe Rabbeinu, as Moshe, our teacher, and the one who's giving us or bringing us the Torah. So we have to keep that always in mind, what we're doing, that what we're doing is more than just the particular sin, the particular problem that we're addressing right now, but it's really causing a larger problem within society as a whole. Good Shabbos.